Okay, so let's get into it. We spend, so much time talking about the how of crime. The deals, the heists, the logistics,
Yeah.
the sheer nerve of it all. We break down the crime, the method, the conviction.
We do.
But today, we want to look at what happens after, the part that's messy, that's complicated, the part that doesn't really have a clean ending.
It's the question that gets ignored all the time, right? What
Yeah.
happens when the trial is over, the sentence is served, and the person is just supposed to start over? And that's our whole mission for this deep dive. We're trying to figure out if genuine deep transformation is even possible.
Exactly. Is it real change or is it just rebranding? Polishing up the criminal past and selling it to a new audience that's hungry for these kinds of stories.
Mm.
And to do that, we're really leaning on these incredibly candid accounts we've heard from guests. People who've tried to make that transition from, a high-stakes criminal life to something else,
Yeah.
public life, a legitimate business, or in a lot of cases, just a relentless ongoing struggle.
And these stories are raw. They're not sanitized for public consumption. Our job here is to look at the few big successes you see online, the media personalities, the entrepreneurs, and weigh them against the crushing reality of the consequences that never ever seem to go away.
What I find so motivating is looking for those transferable skills. Think about the genius it takes to run a massive illegal operation, whether it's drug trafficking or some kind of complex fraud.
Sure, the business acumen is there.
It's pure high-stakes business sense.
Yeah.
And there's just no reason the talent should just disappear when someone gets out of prison. I really believe that people have the capacity for a fresh start, and that same entrepreneurial energy can be channeled into something good.
And that's where we have to get critical, right? That's where the analysis really begins. Because we have to look at this whole redemption narrative with a very skeptical eye. If a former fraudster becomes a big media personality and their whole brand is built on telling prison stories, is that genuine change?
Or is it a new hustle?
Or is it just substituting one high-risk, high-reward game for another one that just happens to be legal? It's not about judging the person, not at all. It's about analyzing the strategy.
It's the perfect monetization of your past mistakes, your past liabilities. And we really need to spend some time digging into how successful and, frankly, how ethically complicated that whole pivot is.
Let's do it. Let's jump right in.
So let's start with the bright spots. Let's talk about the cases where the transition actually led to some real, tangible economic success. Because this is where it gets fascinating. The skills you learn in the black market are, in a weird way, perfectly designed for the legitimate market.
Especially the digital media market,
Yeah.
the attention economy.
Yes.
The market for what? Criminal authenticity? It's booming, absolutely booming. And you've got these media moguls who've taken their single biggest liability, their criminal record, and somehow turned it into their primary asset.
They've literally built a business where their past trauma and their transgressions are the product being sold.
It's a hell of a pivot.
And let's say the most clear-cut example of this has to be Ian Bick, the former fraudster. He's now got this thriving YouTube channel, a public speaking career, and it's all built on his criminal experience.
He's not even subtle about it. He flat out said his criminal past gives him stuff to talk about. He said his best jokes on stage are about prison or the drug game.
He's selling a performance, the performance of the reformed criminal.
And we have to look deeper than just the surface level success here. Bick's story is, it's a profound case study in calculated risk. He said that his goal was to make $1 million. He did that. He spent 18 months in prison for it.
And he said it was absolutely worth it.
Absolutely worth it. He saw the prison time as a short-term, acceptable cost for getting that long-term, high-value capital. It's a business transaction.
See, the believer in me, my side of this, sees a young guy who took a really costly, unique experience and built a legal, profitable brand from it. He turned notoriety into fame, and fame into a paycheck. He's working. He's not committing more crimes. He's contributing something.
But the analyst, the skeptic, sees something different. It's not necessarily a moral transformation. It's a brilliant business transition. He moved from one high-risk, high-reward model to another. He optimized the original crime for the lowest possible cost, 18 months, and the highest possible return, $1 million.
And now he's monetizing the story of that crime.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The hustle, the drive to maximize your return on investment, it's perfectly intact. It never went away. It just changed focus.
And we're part of it. The audience, you listening right now, we're all part of this ecosystem. We are consuming the end product of a former criminal's experience. That creates this huge demand for these stories of extreme life. which makes the act of committing a crime and talking about it valuable.
And that's the tough question, isn't it? Does the success of someone like Bick, who says the time was worth it, does that subtly incentivize crime? I mean, for some young person out there who thinks, hey, I can do 18 months and come out with $1 million and a media platform.
It's a dangerous thought. Now, let's contrast Bick's very calculated, almost cold business pivot with the much more visceral reality that someone like Big Herc faced. He did 9 years in federal prison, and for him, the cage wasn't the scary part.
No, for a lot of these guys who are used to high-stakes environments, prison is manageable. He was terrified of freedom.
That's what the sources say. He said that prison became easy, it felt comfortable. The real shock, the thing that hit him like a ton of bricks, was getting out.
Being shoved into the reality fast at 37 years old. And suddenly he's having to deal with things like paying for car insurance, mortgages, just the basic mechanics of being a legitimate adult. He'd never done it before.
It's an amazing insight. The structure of organized crime and then the routine of prison, it completely shields you from all the mundane administrative burdens of just being a normal civilian.
So that's the gap. That's the part nobody talks about. Reentry isn't just about getting a job. It's about having to relearn how to be a financially responsible adult who has to deal with constant low-level obligations. You lose transferable life skills, and they get replaced by transferable survival skills.
And that's the paradox of the whole system, right? When the structure and predictability of the cage is actually easier and simpler than the chaos of being free with a felony record and no idea how to pay bills.
The path back to what's familiar to the illicit world becomes deeply psychologically appealing. It's almost like a form of self-sabotage, but it's driven by a genuine terror of the unknown.
Okay, let's pivot again. Let's talk about the people who move from the black market into the regulated legal version of the exact same business.
Yeah.
And the best example here has to be the former Harlem marijuana kingpin.
Right. This guy was operating on a massive scale, moving 400 pounds of marijuana a month, illicitly, of course.
An industrial operation.
Absolutely. And then legalization comes along, and he tries to transition. He leverages all his experience, his name, his brand. He becomes a rapper, a personality in the new legal industry. The product's the same, but the legality changes the whole game.
You'd think he'd be a billionaire, right?
Yeah.
He had the supply chain knowledge, he understood the demand, he had the negotiation skills. He should be running the new regulated market.
He should be. But the sources tell a different story. It's a story of an ongoing, maddening struggle. He says he's still only one of 10 black people in the game.
Only 10.
That single statistic tells you everything about the deep structural barriers that exist. These guys pioneered the industry. They took all the risks, they built the market from the ground up, and now the legitimate system is basically locking them out.
What are the barriers?
Licensing, capital requirements, zoning laws, the insane cost of just being legally compliant.
Yeah.
It all functions as this massive wall that keeps the original innovators out so that bigger, more established corporations can swoop in.
So the tragedy is that he can't scale up. He goes from being this massive wholesaler running a logistical empire to being, what, a hand-to-hand salesman again, just on a legal smokers club tour.
The hustle is legal now, and that's a victory, no doubt. But the profits, the scale, it must feel like a huge step down compared to the empire he once controlled. His ambition is being strangled by bureaucracy.
But that core entrepreneurial mindset, that drive,
Right.
it's still there. It's undeniable, and it always transfers. You even see it in the older mafia stories. I'm thinking about Sammy Gravano talking about Lewis.
Right. After Lewis gets out of prison, he gets involved a pinch with ecstasy.
That's the perfect example of what I'm talking about, that commercial compulsion. The drug trade, he moved from whatever he was doing before to ecstasy. But the core drive to find a market, buy in bulk, and move product for a profit.
Yeah.
It's still there. It's intact.
It wasn't like he went back to heavy organized crime or violence. It was just a quick, almost natural return to the dynamics of the market. It's like an engine you can't shut off.
It's an engine, and it's a high-level skill set. We heard from a former pot smuggler who said that dealing is easy to make a profit in if you're shipping in bulk. They built their operation so that they could lose 80% of their shipment.
80%.
80% could get seized or lost, and they'd still turn a substantial profit. All because they managed their logistics and their pricing so perfectly.
That is a level of risk management and contingency planning you'd see at a Fortune 500 company. They learned how to be efficient and control quality because the stakes were literally life and death, or decades in prison.
Another source made the point that the best way to make money is just to have the best product. He said quality is more important than price. People will always pay more for higher quality.
That's branding 101. It's market segmentation. It's straight out of a business school textbook. They didn't need an MBA to understand the value of quality control and brand loyalty in a hyper-competitive, completely unregulated market.
So we've established it. The skills, risk management, logistics, negotiation, resourcefulness, they all transfer incredibly well.
Yeah.
But the success stories we're celebrating, they're often about leveraging the story itself. The asset isn't just the skill.
No, it's the narrative cachet you get from the trauma, from the time served, from all the near misses. And that's the necessary pivot for us now. We have to move from the financial balance sheet to the psychological one.
Yeah.
Because behind every one of these successful transition stories, there's this immense, often crushing weight. So let's talk about the weight of guilt.
These are the moments that really get you. They show the human cost that's hidden under the polished image of the successful media guy or the sharp entrepreneur. I'm thinking of the story from Ali Siddiq, the former crack dealer. He talks about his internal conflict, how even in the middle of all that chaos, he tried to have some kind of code, honor amongst thieves. He said he would never sell to kids or to pregnant women.
It's fascinating, that impulse to draw a moral line in the sand, however small. But he also said he felt crazy because he knew exactly what he was doing to his neighborhood. He was profiting from its destruction, but the drive to make money was it was overwhelming.
That internal conflict must have been a constant torture.
It shows that even in what seems like a moral vacuum, people create these self-justification mechanisms. But those little rules you set for yourself, they don't do anything to stop the overall systemic damage. The crack epidemic still destroyed communities, regardless of who his specific customers were.
He knew. At a fundamental level, he knew he was profiting from pain.
And that feeling of remorse, it can get really existential when these guys start thinking about their own mortality. We heard from a former mafia figure, and he was reflecting on his whole life of crime. And he expressed this deep, profound fear about the final moment before he dies.
Yeah, that was a heavy one. He talked about the fear of overwhelming guilt, a deep feeling of remorse and regret for all the things he knew were just fundamentally wrong. He described that feeling, that final realization, as hell.
And that's not a religious hell with fire and brimstone. It's a psychological hell. It's the inescapable recognition of your own moral failures right at the very end. It suggests that even decades later, even if you're successful on the upside, that internal balance sheet is forever in the red. The psychic toll is the real monster waiting for you.
It's that kind of overwhelming weight that so often leads to a spiritual transformation, or at least the search for one. And it seems to happen most often in the total isolation of a prison cell.
We saw a really intense example of this from a former American criminal who was in a brutal Spanish prison. He talks about hitting absolute rock bottom. He gets sober. He starts kickboxing. And in that moment of intense focus, he has an epiphany. He felt like God's talking to me.
And God was directing him towards a new goal, the UFC.
A new singular focus. He had this moment of clarity. I'm not like these people. What am I doing here? He separated himself from the criminality all around him and found a new purpose in the middle of all that chaos.
It sounds incredibly powerful, a real transformative experience.
It is powerful, but this is where the skeptic in me has to jump in. Is this a genuine spiritual awakening? Or is the search for a new, all-powerful narrative, a God-given destiny, a clear path forward, is that just a necessary survival mechanism to cope with the utter hopelessness of being in a foreign, brutal prison?
But can it be both? A survival mechanism can become a genuine transformation.
Yeah.
We can't just dismiss an epiphany because it happened under duress. That new narrative provides the mental scaffolding you need to endure a place where, as the source said, half the inmates have AIDS.
The conditions are barely survivable.
Exactly. To survive that, you absolutely need a singular focus that can turn your chaotic past into a meaningful future.
I suppose the distinction is academic. The function is the same, whether it's faith or strategy. It provides a new operating system to replace the old criminal code. It lets you endure and build something new.
And beyond the internal damage, there's the external damage. The loss of family, of relationships. That's the other crushing weight you hear about in almost every story. The financial instability, the shame, the simple fact of being physically absent for years.
The stories are devastating. One guest talked about a chaotic family life where his kids were born just weeks apart from different women. Just impossible relational knots. Another guy described his relationship with his own father completely falling apart.
That's the one where he had to physically confront his dad, right?
Yeah. His father robbed one of his workers inside the drug house. The son had to confront his own father, who came at him with a knife over a drug robbery.
A son having to enforce the code of the drug house against his own parent. It's the complete destruction of normal family ties. The criminal life doesn't just hurt the victims, it metastasizes through the criminal's own family, their own bloodline.
It's a tragic inversion of roles. The son becomes the protector of the criminal honor against his own father. And the scars left on those relationships, especially on the kids who are raised without a father or in that kind of instability, they outlast any prison sentence. No amount of YouTube views or money can ever fully repair that kind of loss.
So let's shift to the structural problems, because even for the guys who get out with the best intentions, who've had that epiphany or feel that remorse, they run headfirst into these systemic barriers that actively push them back into the cycle of recidivism. In a lot of ways, the system is designed to pull them back in.
And the most counterintuitive part of it all is what you could call the pull of recidivism. It's the strange magnetic comfort of the cage itself.
We heard that shocking story from a guest who got released on probation and immediately went right back to his old life, back to addiction and the hustle. He refused to even report to his probation officer.
He basically told the authorities, "Terminate me. I don't want to do this. I'm not going to do it. I refuse." He consciously chose to have his probation revoked, knowing it meant going back to prison, because he preferred that to the hardship of conditional freedom.
And that's not an isolated case.
Yeah.
We heard from the former Irish-American gangster who actually made a successful transition, but he admitted that after 9 years in federal prison, the life inside became easy and comfortable.
He had to actively fight against that feeling. He said he was so terrified that I was going to become that guy who just accepts prison as his life. He had to consciously train my mind to focus on getting out and building something legitimate.
So why? Let's dig into that paradox. Why is the security and the routine of a brutal prison environment easier than freedom?
Because prison, for all its horrors, is defined by structure and predictability. There's a clear code of conduct, a daily routine, a defined hierarchy. You know where you stand. Freedom, especially when you have a felony record, is just chaos and poverty.
You're bombarded.
You're bombarded with the stress of survival, economic hardship, nowhere to live, constant judgment from society, and you're right back in the neighborhood with your old associates who are pulling you back into the only life you know. Prison offers certainty. Freedom offers terrifying uncertainty.
And the constant surveillance and legal scrutiny just adds to that pressure. Your past isn't just a memory. It's an active, legal threat hanging over your head every single day.
Even guys who cooperate with the feds are never truly free. We heard from a former cartel smuggler, a Marine who became a boss. He said when he walked into a meeting with his lawyer and the U.S. attorney, the AUSA was floored to see him there.
Meaning they were still building a case against him.
Exactly. It showed the scope of the ongoing investigation. They never stop watching. They never stop connecting the dots. Even years later, your past actions are always being leveraged against your current freedom.
And that brings us to the brutal truth, that the system is ultimately transactional. It's indifferent to human outcomes. We saw that in the story of the former mafia associate who informed on a murder conspiracy. He saved the lives of a judge and an assistant U.S. attorney.
A heroic act by any measure.
You'd think that would count for something. But years later, when he was facing another charge and needed some leverage, some help, the FBI agent he dealt with showed zero interest.
The source said the agent didn't even give a care about the life he saved. It just shows you the brutal reality. The FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, they only care about the next arrest, the next conviction. Your past cooperation has no currency once that transaction is over. You are a useful tool, and once you're no longer useful, your fate is irrelevant.
And all the while, the felony record itself is the one thing that never goes away. It's the perpetual roadblock to getting a legitimate job. A prison guard we heard from made a great point. He said that reducing long sentences gives inmates something to lose, and that makes them behave better inside.
And that reinforces the whole point about systemic failure. If the justice system forces a nothing-to-lose mentality on people with these crazy long sentences and then permanent social exile because of the felony record, denying them housing, education, jobs, then it is actively enabling recidivism.
Of course.
If you close every single legal door, then the only logical choice is to go back through the illicit door, the one that's familiar, even if it's dangerous. When you remove all hope, you paradoxically strengthen the security of the cage.
The pull is just immense. That gang member who was so terrified that I was going to become that guy who was comfortable in prison, He had to consciously retrain his entire mind to aim for a legitimate future.
And that mental retraining is not a small thing. It's a profound, exhausting internal war against the psychological gravity of the life you used to know. It requires a total redesign of your identity and your expectations, and without any external support, that's a battle that most people are going to lose.
But inside that brutal environment, a certain kind of wisdom grows. A hyper-realistic, necessary wisdom. Our sources have shared some incredible advice both for just surviving psychologically and for planning for the future.
The first, and maybe the most important piece of advice, is about the mindset you need just to survive, especially in county jail, which is often just this holding pattern of intense, unpredictable stress before you're even sentenced.
We heard about an old head who taught a younger inmate to focus ruthlessly on the now. Just the now. Forget the past, don't worry about the future. The goal is just minute-to-minute survival.
Get out unscathed relatively. Keep your spirit intact for whatever comes next. It's the ultimate form of forced mindfulness, isn't it? You literally cannot afford the mental energy to torture yourself over who ratted on you or what your sentence is going to be. Immediate tactical survival is all that matters.
And we also saw how important a humble perspective is. A former inmate said he felt like an asshole for complaining about his own sentence after he met an OG who had been fighting a death penalty case for 3 years.
That OG put his problems into brutal perspective. It forced the younger guy to realize, who the sum am I to complain about anything? And that humility, it's not just a virtue in prison, it's a safety measure. If you complain, you mark yourself as weak or entitled. You become a target. Blending in is a survival tool.
And speaking of safety, a key piece of practical advice you hear over and over is the code of silence. Never, ever talk about how much time you have or when you're getting out to other inmates.
That's purely a safety thing. If you announce your release date, you're broadcasting your future vulnerability. You open yourself up to being exploited, to people trying to collect old debts, or even being forced to carry out crimes for them once you're on the outside. You never show your hand.
So that's psychological survival. But then there's navigating the system itself. The whole jailhouse lawyer skill set is basically intellectual power replacing brute force as a way to survive and fight back.
This is where you see some truly brilliant minds at work. We have that incredible story of the Atlanta drug kingpin who managed to get a massive sentence, basically a life sentence, chipped away by arguing a Sixth Amendment violation.
Okay, we need to unpack that for people. The Sixth Amendment guarantees your right to a lawyer, to effective counsel. How did he prove that right was violated?
It was brilliant. He didn't just argue that his lawyer was bad. He argued that the judge knew, or should have known, that his public defender was giving him incompetent advice during the sentencing phase. He basically said that by letting the sentencing go forward, even though there were clear signs of legal incompetence, the judge himself failed to protect his constitutional rights.
He used the judge's own words from the sentencing against him. He put the judge in a trick box, as he called it. So the argument wasn't just, my lawyer was bad. It was the state, embodied by the judge, failed in its duty to protect my rights when the lawyer's incompetence was obvious.
And that highlights the absolute necessity of extreme self-advocacy and critical legal thinking when you're in prison. You cannot rely on the system to save you. You have to become your own legal expert. You have to understand the nuances of constitutional law.
That self-reliance also applies to how you deal with law enforcement before you're even convicted. Guests from all different backgrounds have stressed this basic but often forgotten point. You have the right to say no.
No, I don't want to go talk to you. When the feds try to pull you out of yourself for questioning or to offer you a deal, you have the right to refuse.
Knowing your rights is literally a survival tool, because the second you waive that right and start talking, everything you say can be used to build a bigger case, like a ICAO conspiracy charge, which carries those massive sentences.
And that legal knowledge, that sort of strategic thinking, is what you see from the really smart traffickers on the outside, too. They learn how to structure their finances to avoid getting caught up in a big ICAO case.
How does that work?
It's about breaking the chain of evidence. If you make a bunch of illegal money, but then you launder it through a legitimate business, let's say you're selling sneakers, and you diligently pay your taxes on all the money you make from selling sneakers.
And you've stopped the original crime that generated the cash.
Precisely. You're no longer trafficking. Now the law has a much harder time tying your sneaker business back to the original drug crime under a broad conspiracy charge. You create a legal firewall. The worst they can get you for might be simple tax evasion on your legitimate sales, which is bad, but it's not a life sentence under ICAO.
So the mindset is always the same. You have to be 10 steps ahead. constantly assessing risk, constantly mitigating it. It doesn't matter if the commodity is cocaine or constitutional law. It's the same core entrepreneurial skill, just applied differently.
It's the hustle.
So we've seen this profound, sometimes really heartbreaking dichotomy today. On one hand, you have this incredible, undeniable human drive to succeed. That entrepreneurial gravity that pushed Ian Bick to build a media empire and the former pot kingpin to try and go legit, that commercial drive seems unstoppable.
It is, but that external success always exists alongside a deep internal struggle. The overwhelming guilt, the existential fear of remorse at the end of your life, the profound shock of reentry, and that relentless, seductive pullback to the familiar, comfortable cage of criminality.
When you look at all the stories we've heard, all the narratives shared on platforms like the Connect, it seems like the path might change. You go from moving cocaine to moving content, but the core skills you need to survive and succeed, they stay exactly the same.
Resourcefulness, risk management, logistics, and above all else, the ability to monetize a compelling, high-stakes narrative. Those are the currencies of success, whether the original product was legal or not. The real question is whether our society actually values those skills when they're applied legitimately, or if the system is built to actively undercut them.
Just think back to that former prison guard. He said that when your time is up, the authorities don't let you stay, they kick you out. You are actively forced back into a society that is structurally unprepared and often just unwilling to receive you.
So here's the final provocative thought for you, for the learner listening to this. If our goal as a society is genuine redemption, genuine reintegration, then should that system of just kicking people out the door be replaced with something better? Should we have a structured support system that's sophisticated enough to match the ambition and the high-level skill set these guys learned in the game?
Or will former criminals always be left to navigate the new, unforgiving hustle of legitimate life all by themselves, destined to either succeed by selling their past trauma or fail by returning to the comfort of the cage? And what does it mean that you, the consumer, are actively paying for and therefore monetizing these very narratives of crime and consequence?
It's something to think about long after this deep dive is over.